Welcome to another video from B-Dub's Blogosphere. Just kidding. Okay, I'm writing a little theme song there or something. Anyway, welcome to another video from B-Dub's Blogosphere. Today answering some more viewer questions. There's been a lot of interest in my videos on home recording. I thank those of you who've left positive comments. Because as I often point out, we're all in this together. I'm learning, you're learning, we're just helping each other along. There have been a lot of you that asked questions though about studio monitors, and so I wanted to devote about 10 minutes to talk about studio monitors. As you can see behind me, these are the same you've seen in my past videos, but I've rearranged my studio yet again. And that's partially because of what I'm about to say. If I left them where they used to be, I would be a big hypocrite. So people want to know how to do studio monitoring right. Number one rule is location, location, location. Because you can pick out a $2,000 studio monitor, and if you don't position it right, and if you don't put it in a room that's been acoustically treated right, it's going to sound worse than a $200 monitor. So before we even get into which brands and which specs and all this stuff, let me just tell you, you've got to pay attention to the room you're in and how you're positioning them. Now, as I mentioned, I love these Klipsch computer speakers, and I have the same exact speakers in my home studio and here at work, but they sound completely different. When I first put these in my home studio, they were facing like this, directly back at a wall, just a hard black, or not black, but a hard flat wall. And I tell you, it created this frequency interaction. When I would listen to songs, I was like, why does this sound so bad? It sounded muddy, it sounded just really bassy, and I could turn the bass all the way down and it would still just, and what was going on was I had created this bass phenomenon, I forget the name for it, but the sound waves coming out of here, the puffs of air, are bouncing off the wall, and then as they come back, they're adding to the sound waves still coming out. And so basically I was doubling the amount of some frequencies because I was in an untreated room. There was nothing to dampen the sound, there was nothing to diffuse the sound or deflect it. It was just mirroring back. And so these speakers, while they sound great in this room, sounded terrible in my home studio. Now, I fixed this in certain ways. At my home studio, I added some things to diffuse the sound, just regular furniture, plants, couches, tapestries, pictures, books, anything you can get on that flat wall to make the sound reflect in different areas is going to be good. In addition, I repositioned the speakers so they were no longer flat, but they were kind of at an angle, which caused, again, more diffusion of the sound. So that's important. Position and acoustic treatment. If you can look behind me here, you see that these, my main speakers, I've got them positioned directly pointed at my mixing location. So when I'm here mixing, I can't see this side, I can't see this side, I can't see this side, I can't see this side. I can only see the face of the speaker, and that lets me know it's aimed directly at the sweet spot. Your speaker should be, you know, depending on the type you have, if it's a near field speaker, then you should be pretty close to it. And it should be aimed directly at you. What's going to happen if you don't position them correctly? If this were positioned facing that way, I'm still going to get the same amount of mids and mid-lows and lows, but these more directional high frequencies are going to be directed elsewhere, and I'm going to hear less of them. I'm going to compensate for that as I mix by adding more highs when I really don't need to, and I'll have an inaccurate, poor sounding mix. So make sure your speakers are positioned well, directly at you, you're in the sweet spot. Make sure you've got some diffusion, some absorption going on in your room. And it doesn't have to be high dollar acoustic treatment like Studio Pyramid Foam. These are some absorbers that I actually got as part of a drum isolation booth. And as you can see inside, it's just several layers of soft, I don't know what it is, fiberglass looking stuff. And I use that here in this room to help absorb some of the sound, as well as tapestries, pictures, couches, carpet, chairs, books, just everything to absorb the sound and reflect it. So that's number one. Number two is actually selecting your monitor, and I'm sure that's what most of you actually wrote in about. I would like to tell you that I had a favorite brand and I could just recommend one solution for everybody. I can't do that. There are so many brands of studio monitors, and I've heard good and bad things about them all. So it's up to you to pick one that you can afford, and but there are some specs that you can look at. that are going to help you along your way as you select. So let me pull up a website here where we can look at some of the specs and learn how to compare them. Alright, so I've pulled up a few spec sheets like you would see when you're comparison shopping online. This one's from Guitar Center. You can find them anywhere. The stat my eyes are most quickly drawn to are right here. It says frequency response. And this tells you from low to high what frequencies this monitor can reproduce. We're looking at a Behringer right now. Behringer is one of the low-end brands, but I'm sure they're fine still, good. This claims to go down to 50 hertz and all the way up to 21 kilohertz. For reference, the limits of human hearing are about 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz, or 20 kilohertz. So that's actually a pretty good stat. However, it doesn't give us a tolerance. And so, in other words, its frequency response graph could look like this, which is pretty flat and reproducing all the frequencies pretty well from low to high, or it could very well look like this. It doesn't tell you. This is a speaker that would sound like crap because it's going to accentuate these frequencies, lose those. But as you can see, it still reproduces technically between 50 and 20 kilohertz. So because it doesn't give you any graph, you really don't know what that sounds like. So as impressive as that may sound, may be completely useless. Here's another one. This is for an Atom, which is a very good brand. And you can see if we look at their frequency response, it says 50 to 35 kilohertz. That's way beyond the upper limits of human hearing and frankly unnecessary if you ask me. But if you'll see, they've added a little plus or minus 3 dB tolerance. And so what they're saying with their spec is that if you look at this graph from 50 to way out there, 35, the line is going to go no more down or up than 3 dB. So that's actually a very good and typical spec right there. And you should always look to see that the frequency response has a tolerance of plus or minus a certain number of dB. The smaller that tolerance, the flatter that line is going to be. And this is a spec sheet for the Dynaudio, and you can see it's got a frequency response of 40 to 22. And instead of plus or minus 3 dB, it just has minus 3 dB. So if you imagine a straight line, the only variation you're going to find in this monitor's response is going to be it might dip below that line by up to 3 decibels. So that's twice as good as plus or minus 3 dB. The best stat that you can find is like I showed you, handwritten, a frequency response graph. This is for a JBL. This is actually the speakers that we're using for our surround sound. And you can see very clearly that its response is going to start right about there, somewhere in the 50 hertz range. And it's actually pretty flat all the way up to there, about 15 kilohertz, and then it just drops off. So you can kind of create your own tolerance, and you can say, well, I'm willing to accept, you know, that much, and then I'm going to consider that the upper limit of its capabilities. So I hope that explains a little bit about why it's important not only to look at the numbers, but hopefully to see a graph, because this and this are both 20 to 20 hertz, but one is very different than the other. Other specs you should look at include wattage and SPL level, although those aren't as important. How many watts do you really need for your home studio monitoring? It's not like you're filling an auditorium with sound, so just make sure you have enough wattage to provide distorted sound. So, but I always look at frequency response first, and then basically turn them on, plug them in, and go to town. So that's it for today. Thank you for your questions. Hopefully this has helped you, and let me know. We'll talk to you again soon.